Hello and welcome back. I'm Teresa Riley, and I'm here with Charlie Summer, the founder of the Madonna Interfaith Community. Charlie, when we last spoke, we talked about your healing journey, or at least your finding that there was more to a healing than just going to the doctor and getting a prescription. Can you talk about how that progressed, if it did? And then can you tell us uh, some of the examples of the healing that you were able to do?
Yeah. So the next phase in my journey, I want to know a lot more about healing, certainly the alternate forms of healing. We all knew pretty much, grew up in a medical, pharmaceutical form of healing. But I wanted to know what else was available. So I guess in my journey, I've heard there was a teacher of holistic healing, and Everett Loomis was called the father of holistic healing. And so he had a ranch. So I went to his ranch where a lot of people were, like me, curious, attending or practicing for some forms of alternate healing. And while there, I was impressed with he had like a temple or a church that was dedicated to all forms of spiritual or religious teaching or thought. There was icons for just almost every major religion, and I was impressed by that. Why not? Why not? The same power that it's teaching us to live is teaching us through different spiritual religions. Then I went to the bookstore and browsed and curious about other. I met a lady called Betty Sprague, and she was from New Jersey, and she was running an attitudinal healing center, which was based on writings in the Course of Miracles, which later I got involved in, which has also helped expand my awareness into deeper understanding of spiritual principles. So Betty and I kind of exchanged addresses, maybe stay in touch. Meanwhile, when I went back into my home in Fullerton, I decided I wanted to start a healing arts center. So I gathered together a board of directors. And one of the directors had a nonprofit corporation that wasn't being used, and he would provide that for us. And then I met a psychic person who was well respected in the investigation fields for the police and other police forces to help them find criminals. So I got a hold of Lona Peoples was her name, and I was going to make the Healing Arts Center built around her expertise. So I put together and called in a meeting, and we met in a conference room, probably at a financial center, and we introduced each other and told Lona what ours about, and she spoke and said, "The crystal is fractured." I said, "What? What does that mean?" She said, "It's not going to work." That's what she meant. Well, at that moment, I had so much invested in putting these things together, my ego was fractured. But we still had to go to a restaurant that I had hired so we could all have a meal together. And I tried to maintain a good attitude during my fracturement. And when I got through with the meal and I got home around 10 o'clock in the evening, I went to the mailbox. The family was asleep. I went and I noticed Betty Sprague had sent me a cassette tape. So I decided to listen to it. And it had to do with meditation and attitudinal healing. And when I listened to that tape, my fractured ego amended, and it was amazing. I was no longer depressed. So that showed me another aspect of healing that I was unaware of. So thank you, Betty Sprague.
So what aspect is that? That's just the healing of the mind? Is that what you're thinking, or the healing of the emotions? Can you say more
Yeah,
about that?
okay. It's called attitudinal healing. And so much of our life, it's our attitudes that allow us to either move freely or restrict us. If we have an attitude of gratitude, that opens up our awareness and willingness to participate in life without harsh judgments. Whereas an attitude of anger, attitude of making people wrong, or attitude that's very restrictive. So attitudinal healing then is so important in all aspects of our life. So I've learned to have more of an attitude of gratitude.
Thanks, Charlie. That's good. And just for my sense of time, where are we in the years? Are we in the 70s, 80s when you were opening that
Yeah,
healing sanctuary?
this would have been in the middle of 1970-ish. Um, and so what led me further, I started taking some classes that were taught by the Church of Religious Science based on Ernest Holmes' principles. And I took a class on prosperity. And here again, wow, it helped me open up my mind in a way that I was surprised. We don't know we don't know how often we restrict ourselves by our belief systems or negative attitudes. We all do that, and some of us so much that we get hardly nowhere in life. So anyway, this class on prosperity I took turned out to be a wonderful exercise. And I'll give you an example, if you like, on how that worked for me. The example is I had started my own business, insurance brokerage business, where I would provide insurance for small businesses. Oh, that's another story. Wow. I started it. I started at a time that insurance agencies were declining business. They were ending their arrangements with some agents. It was a time the interest rates were climbing up to close to 18%. Anyway, through my connections and friendships with my neighbors and through Indian guides, one of the fathers got me an appointment with the Hartford, which started me off. I needed somebody to start me, and that got the ball rolling. But that's another story. The story I wanted to tell you about on prosperity was I decided I was leasing an office space for my business and for my wife's counseling practice. And I decided I wanted to own my own place. So I searched for about a year for a building that I could buy. I couldn't find any that would work for me. So I decided then to buy a vacant parcel of land that I would build an office on. And I was working with a real estate lady. And so I had entered escrow. And the real estate lady called me and she said, you know, there's a property that just came on the market I think you ought to see. Well, my mind was telling me that, you know, I'm already committed in escrow. I can't afford to do anything else other than buy that property. But then I said, well, I opened my mind. I said, okay, no harm in taking a look. So when I took a look at the property, it was absolutely perfect for my wife and I. It was a little commercial strip shopping center that had a vac, vacant area that was big enough for me to build out offices. Um, so I was still in a dilemma. What do I do? I mean, I can't afford both. So I called my CPA and told him my dilemma. He said, wow, I'm looking for property. I'll take your place in escrow if you let me. I'll get your property. I said, wow, that became the solution. So once again, that showed me that having an open mind, allowing spirit to flow rather than to restrict the flow of God-like energy, I opened it up to the possibility of harmonizing with what God was offering me. Thank you, God.
Well, Charlie, for folks who may not be familiar with that or who are a little bit confused by all the manifestation jargon that we keep hearing today, do you have a process or is there some way that you allow spirit to flow through you? Is there some way you know the feeling or how does that work for you?
Well, let's go back to this property, this strip shopping center. It was a very complex transaction that no ordinary person without help could find their way through it. But I had a close friend, maybe my closest male friend at the time, who worked for Coldwell Banker. And he walked me through this complex sale. Um, that was amazing because it had what was called wraparounds. It had three wraparounds so that, you know, I would pay somebody, they would then with a mortgage, and they would pay somebody else, and then they would pay somebody else, and they'd pay the original mortgage holder. And if anybody defaulted along the way, it would have gone astray. Now, so where does courage come from? Where does faith come from? Uh, it's like the absence of fear. So at that time, I had to, in order to make it work, I had to hawk my castle, which was kind of in my mind. You don't do that. You want to lose your castle. But I was willing to put it on the line because I had faith. I found the courage within myself to overcome that fear. And that has a lot to do with allowing spirit to work through us, as us, and it creates results that we would have restricted otherwise. So it isn't magical thinking. It isn't like, oh, if I dream about I want a particular house, uh, but I don't do anything about it. I don't treat. I don't move my feet. I don't do the necessary steps. Then you're a failure. Your dream dies on the vine. So any inspiration then, if it's not followed through, it's like you're turning your back on spirit, or what I call God.
And when you say hawk your castle, what you meant was sell your family home. Is that
I
what you're
meant
saying?
I had to mortgage it to get the money out of it
Okay.
to put the down payment on the shopping center.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that makes it a very scary decision, right? Because it's your family place.
Yeah.
So, is there a knowing, how do you know that you've made the right decision? Or do you just allow yourself to be flexible enough to understand if it's the wrong decision, you change course? How does that work for you?
Well, that's a very good question. Maybe there's not an easy answer to it because when we honor our intuition, uh, it's like we're having faith in an outcome we know not of. We're not sure what the outcome will be. So we have to put our faith in something greater than we are that we're one with. And if we don't do that, then then we don't move forward. So it isn't, we talk about blind faith, people, we do stupid things blindly, right? But if it's coming from our egotistical need to do something, it could result certainly in catastrophe. But if we're coming from a deeper well of understanding, if we honor that feeling of intuitive knowing within us, then we're trusting in something greater than we are that we're one with. Now, I guess that's kind of a learning process. Uh, you have to have, in order to do it a few times, you have to do it almost blindly in a sense. But if you don't, you stifle your ability to grow and to prosper.
So what I hear you saying is that faith is kind of like a muscle, and every time that you use it, it gets just a little bit stronger. Do you remember when you first had to take your first great leap of faith? Or was it something that you just did little by little throughout your life?
Well, another great question, Terry. Faith. Yeah, I used to use that analogy that you talked about. Um, that a discipline. We need to have a discipline that helps us, like a spiritual muscle. So whatever discipline we choose, if we choose one that is designed to help us grow, um, it reinforces that our faith, I guess you could say. It becomes a faith muscle. So once you've experienced it a few times and you keep um, doing the spiritual exercises like yoga for one, meditation for another, um, mindfulness. There's a lot of different disciplines out there that help us expand our spiritual awareness. And the other part of that is if you're doing it in a group like the Madonna Ministry, there's a cohesiveness. Like the Bible says, two or more come together in prayer, you're more powerful than if you're not doing it otherwise. And scientifically, there's a lot of evidence that shows that um, what we give out, we mirrors back to us. Uh, and the whole process of spiritual growth is more like a funnel. It like it it expands. The funnel starts narrow and it funnels, and it's like where it funnels out is the expansion of our awareness. And one of my teachers I met along the way, Bishop Arnold, uh, Bishop Waters, uh, he explained it this way. He said, "You infundibulum, when my wife met with him, he was almost 100 years old. And he was talking about an infundibulum, and Bobby and I looked at each other. We didn't have a clue what that meant. So we looked it up, and it meant the pituitary gland, or what's called the third eye, and which is a funnel shape. And I've taken classes from psychiatrists that are spiritually involved, and they called it funnel consciousness.
Well, Charlie, before we get into funnel consciousness, I want to talk about, in your book, you talked about a mistake that you made. You trusted somebody who ended up costing you a lot of time and effort and money to fix your house after they had ruined it, that contractor that you talk about. Now, how did that figure into your faith? And is faith always 100% right? Or how does that figure into this conversation?
Yeah. Okay. I think as we get more involved in intuitive knowing, we pay attention to our feeling nature, and it's often a clue to what's going on in our present moment. And what happened was, there's a lot of stories around that, but I ended up getting a most beautiful, very unique home in San Clemente. I was in escrow on, and about to close escrow. In order to buy that house, I needed to sell my other property at a time when interest rates were 18% and nobody was buying or selling anything. It was just, I was offered, jewelry as a down payment or coins or whatever. Nobody had, hardly anyone had cash. So I met with a contractor who was convincing me he was going to improve the house because of his skill set, and it'd be worth more. And so essentially he got into it with hardly, I don't think he paid anything down except a promise to pay. So when I met with him, with my son for lunch, I decided, I don't think this is going to work. My feeling nature was saying, this isn't the guy. He doesn't have the integrity. Uh, but my mistake was I allowed him to move some of his possessions into my garage. So legally, he had taken possession of my house, even though it was in escrow and it hadn't closed. And I realized that would have been quite a, I would, and I told him I wasn't going to go through with it. He rebelled and threatened lawsuits and all that stuff. And I cowered down, and not so much as like being a coward as to realizing the house I had just bought required 6 months of rebuilding and repair to make it livable, that I was putting a lot, maybe most of my energy in doing that. And I didn't want to be distracted. Uh, so I allowed him to close escrow. And as a result of that, a few years later, I paid the price. And the price was he destroyed the property. He allowed 3 dogs to live freely in the house, do whatever they wanted. He tore down the ceilings to make it look like he was going to construct something. He let all the landscaping die. The pool was a horrible mess. So, but now I'm through with the repairs and living serenely in my other house. Now I have to deal with the dilemma that I created because something in me knew it wasn't going to work.
So it wasn't listening to your intuition that was what got you into trouble.
yeah, it was ignoring it. I had good reasons to ignore it.
It was the easier way.
Yeah,
So it sounds like you learned a pretty huge lesson from that situation. Does that make
yes,
sense?
definitely, definitely.
Okay. So when we use our judgment and our discernment, we're not always 100% right on. It doesn't automatically work for us. We're still humans, right? So it's a matter of trusting that even if it goes wrong, there'll be a way through it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, yeah. The easy way of putting it is, if your mindset on something happening one way, and you hold on to that, then you're closing our minds. So we say that when one door closes, another door opens. But that means we have to keep our options open to find out what else is available. We have to release what we're holding dearly to. And most oftentimes, it creates something better than what we have possibly imagined.
Thank you, Charlie. That's great. So we're getting to the end now, and we promised that we would talk about your UFO experience. Can we jump to that now? And then next time we'll come back to talk about Arnold Michael, funnel consciousness, and whatever else we've got going on after that.
Yeah. Well, the UFO multiple experiences are too long to go into for this session. Let's discuss it in another session. But I think I can share one more valuable experience that came out of a negative um, thing. So now that I own that beautiful um, home in San Clemente, which is a work of art, which is all cedar and glass, 5,000 square feet over an acre, view path to the ocean, blah, blah, blah. Um, at that time, I also had graduated from a ministerial school where I learned more about the art of healing. And I thought I was going to end up in a local church. It looked like a shoe-in for me. I wouldn't have to go anywhere. And it turned out that didn't work out. I got stymied. Um, that's another story to talk about. But what I wanted to bring up was I tried then to start study groups. I, I became frustrated. I wanted to serve and found no way of serving. Uh, Eventually, I found a tumor growing on turning black on my gut. So I went to a dermatologist. She cut it all out and eventually sent me a certified letter saying she recommended I go to a general surgeon to make sure everything is extracted that's harmful, cancerous, melanoma. And so I called Gail, my dermatologist. I said, Gail, but I want to know, are the borders cleaned from what you cut out? The lab said, yes, the borders are clean. I said, thank you. Hung up. And I looked myself in the mirror in my bedroom and said to myself, God, if I'm dying at the gut, what is it I'm afraid to do that I'm not doing? Boom, the answer hit me hard. Okay, what I learned from that was to surrender. My picture, I did up to that point, I started looking around candidating for local churches and nothing happened until I finally said, God, I surrender. I'll take me wherever. Now, what I was, my mindset was locked in. I didn't want to destroy my 25 years of marriage or relationship. My wife didn't want to move away from where she was. She had her own international speaking practice. She didn't marry a minister. I didn't want to disrupt our whole marriage or family setting. And God said, follow me. So I began candidating an hour away, 2 hours away, 3 hours away. Finally, a church out in El Centro, California was a farming community that you drive through. You wouldn't want to live. It was a very hot climate. That's where I ended up going. And it turned out to be one of the most marvelous experiences I ever had. And it worked out that our marriage enhanced our marriage. It didn't kill it or our family relationship.
So at El Centro, you were a pastor there? Is that what you were?
Yes, I was pastor of a beautiful facility, was built by the Mormons. We had a large community room with a stage. We had a large kitchen. I had my own office. We had a library. Then we had a sanctuary. It was a marvelous place, and most of the people in the farming community that attended it were people of professional backgrounds. They were teachers, they were lawyers, medical people. Uh, so they understood more of the teaching of science of mind and how God works through us. Science of mind is simply science of God, science of understanding the nature of God, how God works in us and through all creation. So it was a time of, if you want to learn something, teach it. So fortunately, it was a time of growth for me.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Well, we had a great conversation today about manifestation, about faith, about making mistakes, and about being Charlie. So with that, next time we'll talk about funnel consciousness. We'll talk about your healing time as a healer at El Centro. And I promise you, I will not let you get away without talking about your UFO experiences.
Yeah, we will definitely get to that because that's a series of experiences that boggled my mind as well. Thank you.
So thank you, Charlie. Once again, we had a beautiful session, and thank you everyone for listening. And until we see you again, may you be a blessing to the world, and may the world bless you.
Namaste.
Namaste.